Good evening. I'm John Meacham, and I am delighted to be here, particularly in the Reagan building. When President Reagan was in Hollywood, he would be called to do benefits, and he would say, "But I can't sing or dance." And the organizers would say, "Well, we know, but you can introduce those who can." So I'm here to offer introductory questions to Harry and to John. With the generous support of Intel, we've done a survey at the magazine the past couple of weeks on innovation. And I'd like to open with a bit of data from that global survey that has extraordinary, here it is, 23% of Americans, this is the general population of the United States, believes that the 1990s were the most technologically innovative in American history. And so just looking at those numbers, I would ask John, do you think that's right? And if not, why not?
I think it's hard to single out any one decade, especially since the trend line seems to be a bit choppy. You know, we could also identify the decade of the 90s as one in which each of our kind of personal financial well-being levels improved dramatically, perhaps attributable to technology. The secular trend is that the fund of knowledge, the fund of intellectual capital, the fund of discovery continues to grow. It's a change not only in the amount of new stuff, but in the rate of change. So one would actually expect this curve to continue to go up, not necessarily to dip. So this may be a well-being index as much as an innovation index.
So how do we get the next one above 23% then?
Well, obviously, well-conceived policies that ignite our American innovation engine and produce the economic benefits that we attribute to innovation is an answer. But it's not going to happen in 5 or 10 years. You know, these are long-term investments and long-term trends, I believe.
Don't forget that Gordon Moore's prediction, the Moore's law about the number of transistors you could get in a chip, was more than prophetic. It was fantastic. And I believe personally that if we can get out of this present slough of despond, we actually will accelerate in the way that Gordon Moore predicted for the chip.
Now we have here expertise that goes from the 17th century to about the 29th, I think. And so I'll let you guess which goes where. But Harry, you've written They Made America. I will do some innovative product placement. What have been the conditions of American innovation in the past that have fueled great eras of advance in terms of economics, which often, as we know, leads to political and cultural?
Well, of course, I'm sure John would agree. John, by the way, his book is an absolute program for tomorrow, for the day after tomorrow. My book is really accounting how we got to where we are today, and he's the futurist, if I might say so, full of valuable information. Now, the point of my book and how it answers that question, I hope, because first of all, of course, the political innovation of America is first of all absolutely fundamental, which is a free society. As Mr. Ottolini said, innovation comes from individuals, but don't discount government entirely, because the GI Bill, for instance, and by the way, folks, you see this thing in my ear? It's a hearing aid. Where did it come from? It came from the defense industry because of the transistors, and when they found the rockets overheating and had to replace the germanium with silicon, I'm a beneficiary, and so are many people in this room. So do not discount government entirely. In fact, of course, the way it misspends dollars in education is a scandal. But going back, it really is. I live in a dysfunctional state. You probably live in happier climes than New York. I mean, if you want to see a dysfunctional state, I'll give you a guided tour of Albany one day. Now, the point about it is this. What I stress in my book is the huge difference between invention and innovation. They are very different. And one thing which slightly worries me at the moment, and they're quite right, John's book is brilliant on this. It's quite right to stress the need for science graduates and technology graduates. In fact, I sometimes feel that if I were a kid today, I couldn't stir without a PhD. But in terms of the history of innovation, it's very often come from people without any science training at all. And I want to stress this, I don't want to take too much time at the beginning, but I'd like to amplify this later, that science and technology are only a beginning, are the handmaidens for an innovator with vision. And in the history of the 200 years that I've described in my book, time and time again, I'm struck by, first of all, the democratization influence of the technology, going back even to things like the Morse code and so on. And secondly, by the fact that many of these innovations built, and John can amplify this, they're incremental in the sense, as Henry Ford said, I didn't build anything new. I simply built on the work of centuries of men before me. And there's absolute truth in that, because he wasn't even the first, of course, to get a motor car going, automobile.
So if I can build on that, because I think it's a very important point. We often, in our central casting perspective, think about innovation as being people in the white lab coats who say, eureka, the discovery part, in a sense, of what I would argue is a much broader process that goes from possibility to the realization of value, hopefully in a societal context, serving some kind of larger purpose. So we'd have to think not only about engineers and scientists, but also about designers, behavioral scientists, people who are, in the term of art, brokers or translators between the cultures of invention and the cultures of commerce, people who grow enterprises and know how to take the discovery and make it relevant to a broad range. Because I think one of Sir Harold's key points in his book is that it's not enough to simply have something that's good and valuable, but it has to be valuable for a lot of people. Now, if I can hook this to another idea about why innovation is different and why we as a country really have to pay attention to it. You know, it used to be that innovation worked in these vertically integrated, almost innovation factories, you could say. So pharmaceuticals were developed in these behemoth organizations where everything from invention to sales was under one roof. Well, in the 80s, you had venture-backed biotechnology companies. So the tasks were different. Instead of running a monolith, you could start a company. You could raise venture capital. But today, there are companies, for instance, in my hometown of San Francisco, that are developing drugs, and they have 9 people or 10 people. And they're not located in some tech haven. They're in the financial district of San Francisco, and they have no PhDs. And why is this? It's because many of the fundamental slices of the drug discovery value chain are being outsourced to providers around the world. Get your clinical trials done in Poland. Get your medicinal chemistry done in India. Get your marketing and distribution done by channel partners around the world. So what we're seeing as we observe this historic global dissemination of innovation capability is also the value chain spreading out around the world in ways that fundamentally change the opportunities and arguably also create a lot of challenges for both companies and also for countries.
I want to ask you about obstacles to both innovation and invention by reading something from John's book about one of his first days on the faculty of the Harvard Business School.
Uh-oh. Oh, yes. You've had it now when you go back to Boston.
That's right.
That's true.
Persona non grata. No more Boston baked beans.
If I worked, by the way, if I worked in the financial sector, I'd be working on drugs too.
Working on them.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, working. Hell, I come close enough now. This is John speaking. I arrived as a newly minted assistant professor at the Harvard Business School. I sought out faculty reaction to my plans for teaching and researching the topic of innovation. One of my colleagues, a distinguished-looking professor with a shock of white hair and the desk the size of a small battleship, looked me over and said, "Let me give you some advice. Innovation is not a good subject for you to teach here." "Why not?" I asked. His reply, "Because everything that is important about the subject has already been reflected in the literature."
Of course, that's when I knew I was onto a great topic.
So, leaving aside the Harvard faculty,
It's a true story.
What's in the way here? Are there cultural obstacles within corporations, within the government, education? Just what do we have to identify and get rid of in order to find the big ideas and the small ideas that are going to push us ahead?
Well, where to start? I mean, I think innovation begins with a mentality and attitudes towards risk, a desire to apply a work ethic to a dream. And, you know, we're in a country these days where more graduate degrees are given out for parks and recreation than for foreign languages and culture. You know, we're in a culture that, you know, where our young can identify more names of baseball stars and movie stars than Nobel Prize winners, scientists, and technologists. I mean, I have a friend in Singapore who runs something called the Singapore Biopolis, which is their big life sciences play as a platform. He has this really amazing poster of a young lady with a DNA tattoo around her arm. I looked at the poster and said, you know, what's this? And he said, oh, you like that poster, huh? Well, I'll give you the secret. She's a model. And her father's Norwegian, her mother's Chinese. And I commissioned the poster because my job in Singapore is to make science sexy. So the whole question of values, of mindset, I think is really important. But where to start in terms of the mechanics? I mean, if we can't, you know, as they say, if no bucks, no Buck Rogers, right? And Mr. Olini talked about the IPO market. I mean, we're precariously perched on a slippery slope, if I can mix metaphors, where our ability to fund with venture capital may become globally disseminated. I mean, why should a GP of a venture fund remain domiciled in the United States if they get taxed at ordinary income rates? There's plenty of other places to go.
When I began my book, I was struck by something quite remarkable, despite what you say, and it's true about this country. I want to give you a couple of quick examples. This is the first book on 200 years of innovation. Why? For Pete's sake. Because I thought I'd find a vast literature, but in fact we've always honored the political revolutionaries, which you've written about eloquently, and we haven't really celebrated much. We know about Bill Gates and, you know, the few who are really, but we don't actually, I think, celebrate enough. I've made a note here. We talk about democracy, and John's suggested this, and he's absolutely right. This is where the great innovations we're all enjoying today came from. And I can trace them all out for you. A cobbler, a trucker, a deck boy, a piano salesman, a storekeeper, a stock trader, a Harvard professor, a portrait painter, the daughter of slaves, a playboy, an air taxi pilot, and of course, a couple of bicycle mechanics. So that's where, I mean, I get slightly irritated. I mean, look, the present panacea is invent more scientists, more technologists. Fine, we definitely need them, okay. But without the vision, without somebody being able to put two and two together and create an innovation, it won't work. For instance, in his book, John mentions a very significant thing. 60,000 patents die a year. An MIT study pointed out that most patents, only 10% of patents, scientific patents, have any value, and only 1% have anything like the value of, say, John Vaught's inkjet for Hewlett-Packard. So unless we understand that innovation doesn't just spring purebred from a science. If you take, let me give you a classic example, which Intel is associated with this too. Let's take one of the greatest innovators of our time, and I use that word deliberately, innovator, Bill Gates. Bill Gates is not a technologist. Bill Gates, I don't think that Bill Gates has written real code in his life. He adapted BASIC from two Dartmouth professors. The man who really, the scientific brains that created the operating system for computers was Gary Kildall, who worked for Intel. He was a consultant for Intel. Gary Kildall was a genius, an unrampant genius, who invented the only and the first operating system whereby any software could be used on any hardware. Just think of that. Before that, you had to be specific to the hardware. Right. So he invented our modern computer industry. But Gary Kildall didn't have the vision that Bill Gates had to put together, assisted greatly by Intel, a standardized architecture. And of course, IBM didn't have the vision either, so they gave him the rights for good. So if Bill Gates had been tested on codes alone, he would have flopped. he would have flopped. Gary Hill would have passed 100%. He wrote code like Mozart wrote a concerto. But Gates was the innovator because he put these things together. Just as Ford wasn't the inventor of the motor car, he was the innovator because he had a democratizing vision. There's so many of these people. I mean, somebody mentioned the Morse code. You know, Morse, the scientific basis for Morse code didn't come from Morse, it came from Joseph Henry. But what Morse did, he saw the possibilities, put 2 and 2 together and made 10. Agree?
Absolutely. Innovation isn't innovation unless it has a broad impact.
Yeah.
You know, it's creativity applied to some purpose to realize value on a sustained basis.
Take something from the brainwave to the bustle of the marketplace. And by the way, many of these small businesses I mentioned, why do they fail? Lack of customers, improper marketing. They spent all their energies doing this thing. Now, unless it's something pretty obvious like, you know, the genius Steve Jobs or Twitter or whatever, a lot of these innovations fail because.
And if I can build on that, I mean, this is where I think the notion of large-scale innovation comes into play, because the kind of grand challenges that we speak about these days, the kind of wicked problems that afflict the world, are not necessarily going to be resolved by a few Sand Hill Road venture capital-backed startups.
Right.
They will require a broad consensus among public sector players at different levels, the private sector, the NGO sector, and civil society. This is, in a sense, the cutting edge of bringing innovation to innovation, which again is why it's so interesting to look at international examples, because countries around the world are experimenting with their own ideas about how to make large-scale innovation a reality, how to look at next-generation societal services, how to turn their countries into laboratories and design factories and prototyping platforms for getting at the 21st century industries. And nobody has the answer right now. I mean, whenever I see the words innovation expert, I always feel kind of funny about that, because I don't believe there are experts anymore. I mean, I believe that we're all at a new starting line, and we're all looking at the high ground, looking for the high ground of innovation in our own way, and no country has the magic formula anymore.
No, but you've got a lot of brilliant examples. Singapore and Finland in John's book are really marvelous examples for us. I mean, just picking up on that point, when I was here on the Harkness Fellow in the 50s, I went back to England, and I was furious. Britain invented radar. Robert Watson, I was a science reporter, and went to the National Physical Laboratory, where I saw the chair where Robert Watson invented radar. Frank Whittle invented the jet engine. Alfred Fleming discovered penicillin. The first electronic office in the world, computerized office, was at Joe Lyons Cafes in London in 1955. What happened to these inventions? All came to America, where the innovators took over on the large scale. For instance, there were 2 guys carried a magnetron across the Atlantic. FDR, within a very short time, had 4,000 scientists at MIT working on the basis of the American electronics industry. It started in Britain, but Britain, with a very unequal education system, only 2% went to higher university, with no recognition that America has of democratic processes, fell behind. Now, I hope we're not in that same position as the United States and are going to be left behind by the Finlands and Singapores and the Chinas. Just a small example, I love my country, but when my book did very well in the United States, the publisher said, well, sell it in Britain. Oh, you know what they said? We can't learn anything from America about innovation. So they sold it to China. Instead, it's in Chinese.
Well, we got radar and then we got Harry. Sort of a last thought from both of you. If you had one lesson for this group, obviously, who care deeply about the issue, who care deeply about the country and about the world, who understand that prosperity is in many ways the oxygen of freedom, what is it? What should we be, for both of you, what should we bear in mind, both as they go through the next couple of days and then, more important, the years ahead?
Just picking up, John's book has got a wonderful chapter on education. I just want to say, I want to just add one note to it. You know, the big problem with education is the teachers. A good teacher, a really good teacher, can transform a child from the bottom quartile to the top. Right. A good teacher, a really above average teacher, can take a really poor performing child into the stratosphere of achievement on the National Achievement Awards. Doubling the class size and resisting merit pay, which is what the educational establishment, first of all, they want to double the class size, which means spending a lot more money. It's completely a waste of money. What they should do is use the internet for distance learning, that the best teachers should reach more kids, and that alone would do twice as much as classrooms. Now, he's got hundreds of valuable suggestions on education in his book, and I'd just like to throw my dimes within there.
Well, thank you for that. I got 2 points in answer to your question. First of all, I think everybody's interested in innovation, but the question is, if innovation's the big answer you're looking for, whether it be as a company or a country, what's the question that you're trying to address? What's the purpose of innovation, in short? And I think especially when we talk about innovation in a society or in American society, we need to be asking the question, what is it for? What is the purpose? And that leads to a bunch of questions that have to do with, what does America choose to have its place in the world be in the 21st century? How could innovation as a renewed capability in our country be a way of engaging globally so that, we can say, not what is good for America is good for the world, but what is good for the world is good for America. So I think this notion of the vision for America in relation to innovation is something that, is an open-ended question. The other point is that there are really 3 basic questions about innovation. What is it? Why is it important? And how do you do it? I think we're here because we know that it is important. I think we've had a great discussion about what it is, which obviously can carry on. But I think the $64 question for the United States, for countries around the world, for companies, is how to do it. And that is an open question where I'm sure an audience of this brain power and caliber will be able to come up with some great responses.
Very briefly, as you all know, this is Winston Churchill's birthday. Harry had a cake backstage. I noticed the epigraph of John's book, which I think should reassure all of us, from Churchill. The American people always do the right thing after they've exhausted every other alternative. On that note, have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's great.
Just like to thank John again, and Harry and John, for that provocative conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your dinners, and a reminder that following dinner, we're going to have Judy Woodruff and Larry Summers up here to engage us all in a conversation. Please enjoy.